This screencast supports this lesson on modal verbs and is from Cutting Edge Upper Intermediate 3rd edition student's book by Sarah Cunningham, Peter Moore and Jonathan Bygrave, and it's published by Pearson. The topic is questions we've always wondered about, and it covers things like mysteries of the human body, earthquakes, and some other fun questions like do fish sleep, etc. So the suggested lead-in in the book is to get the students thinking about these questions in 1A. So the first thing we need to do is just check the understanding of tickle, hiccup, catch a cold and sleepwalk, just to make sure they understand that language, and then get them talking together about their thoughts on the answers to these 4 questions. They could do this as a whole group, or you could put them into small groups. And when they've finished discussing, don't confirm any of their answers yet, but allow them to read the article and check to see if their ideas were correct. So here's the article. It's called Mysteries of the Human Body. So get them to read it quite quickly and check the answers to the 4 questions that they've discussed earlier. Then they can come back together and discuss which ones they got right and which ones they got wrong, and any that were surprising. Now the second task is to reread the article, and this time to do a language task, which is to decide on the correct modal. So you might want to recap on what a modal verb is. Students will know this, and ask them to give you some examples. So ask them, they should come up with things like can, should, must, can't, might, etc. Okay, so perhaps turn it into a little game. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to write down as many modal verbs as you can think of. Now you're going to read the article again and choose the correct modal verb. No need to do any teaching of the language before they do this task. This is a test, teach, test approach where we first test the students, give them a task to see what they know. So the aim of this exercise is to diagnose what they already know. You can get them doing this individually and then peer check, or put them into small groups and get them to discuss together. Then get some feedback, making sure they can see the correct answers. Now that you've monitored that task, you should have a pretty good idea of what they know and they don't know. So give them this grammar task from the book, and using the article that they've just worked on, they can try and do these gap fills and complete them with the correct words. Get them doing this in small groups as a guided discovery task so that they are working out the rules. Okay, so they're finding, they're answering question 1 first of all, then they're finding modals in the website article that mean these things, and then they're matching modals to their meanings here. And there's another question, a 4th question after that. You can look at the Read Study 1 page 152, which I've included with your teaching materials. Once they've done the task in small groups, get some feedback and make sure that they can see the written answers to all of the questions. Use concept checking questions to really clarify the meaning where you need to. And check the form. So what comes after have to? What comes after can't? What comes after must, etc. Okay, it's the bare infinitive. So they need to know that, don't they? So find a way to elicit that from the students. And then You can drill some of the modals in context, so choose some of the sentences from the reading article and drill some of those that contain the modal verbs so that they can hear what happens to the language in a sentence. So earlier we talked about test, teach, test. So the first test was to identify the correct modal verb. This is the teach stage where they are working out the rules and you're making sure that they're clear on the rules of meaning, form and pronunciation. And then we move on to a second test stage, which is another controlled practice exercise. Before they do the controlled practice exercise, there's a little question here. 1A, read the text below. What ability might some animals have that humans don't? Why? So you can get your students discussing some ideas. You can give them some examples to start them off and get them to think about reasons for their ideas. You want them to think specifically about how animals can be used to predict natural disasters and if they know anything about that. Once you've heard their ideas, you can pre-teach behaviour and magnetic field. That's some tricky language that comes up in the task. And ask students to read the text and check against their ideas, first of all. And then they need, secondly, to do B, complete the text with the correct modals. So this is a similar task to the one before. As with the one before, always do the first one together as an example, and then allow them to do the rest either individually in peer check afterwards or in small groups, and then get some feedback. Make sure you monitor the task closely and make sure that you are listening out for anything that they're still finding hard at this stage, so that you can clarify and check that further in feedback. An alternative to that most recent task we've just talked about is to do this one instead, because it's a different type of task and it requires the students to come up with their own modal verbs. So it's a little bit more challenging. And as I say, it adds a bit more variety to the lesson. So this one is from page 152 of the course book, which is in the teaching materials. And they need to match the animals in the box to the information below. So first of all, they look at the 8 sentences and they talk together to decide which animal it's talking about. Okay. You might want to, first of all, teach these animals by getting them perhaps to match the animal with a picture, something like that, or to show a picture and to give the first letter of the animal and maybe some gaps representing each letter that's missing, and get them to work it out for themselves if you want to make it even more challenging. And then once they've understood the animals, they can decide which animal matches with which sentence. And then thirdly, they can decide which modal verb goes in which gap. I think this is a nice activity to do because it does add more variety to the lesson. Make sure, as always, that they peer check if they've worked individually and you get feedback and that they can see the answers written down. So they've done the test, teach, test stages of the lesson and had some practice using the modal verbs. So now they're going to do this activity. Exercise 2, read the questions below about mysteries of the natural world. All of them were asked of experts in a science radio programme. What do you think the answers are? So you've got 5 questions. Why do fish sleep? Why don't polar bears' feet freeze? Etc, etc. Now you can get them talking together about this straight away if you want to, or you can give them a little bit of time to make some notes some brief notes about their ideas, and then get them talking together. Whichever way you decide to do it, you need to make it clear before they discuss their ideas together that they need to use modal verbs of possibility to express their opinions. So, for example, fish must sleep because otherwise they get really tired. Or it might be possible that a loud sound could kill you because it could burst your eardrums and make your head explode, something like that. Okay, so elicit some examples from them and make sure that they're absolutely clear when you're setting up this task that they need to use modal. So you might want to have those modal verbs on your slide along with the instructions for the task to remind them to use that language. Okay, so let them talk together and listen out for examples of the target language and make sure that they are using it. Then they can come back together and as a whole class and tell the whole group what their ideas are. And to check to see if their ideas are correct, they can listen to the audio where the experts are telling them the answers. Get some feedback on which ones they got right, which ones they got quite wrong, and then move on to the next stage of the lesson. Now the students can have some fun and come up with any questions themselves that they've always wondered about. Try and elicit a couple of examples from them and give them a set amount of time to write down perhaps 3 questions each that they want to ask the class or their small group, depending on how you want to do it. And they then ask their classmates, and the classmates have to give possible answers using modal verbs: must, can't, might, may, could, etc. If you have time, you can get the students to Google their questions at the end and find out the real answers and share those with their classmates. They should have some fun finding out if their ideas were correct or not, and hopefully they'll learn something new. You can finish off the lesson with some post-fluency error correction, highlighting good examples of the modal verbs that you've heard and getting students to identify and correct any incorrect sentences using the target language.